The UK, US, and Australia have announced a historic security pact in the Indo-Pacific region. The Defence Pact, named AUKUS AUKUS, will let Australia build nuclear-powered submarines for the first time using technology provided by the US.
The future of the Indo-Pacific will impact all our futures. To meet these challenges, to help deliver the security and stability our region needs, we must now take our partnership to a new level.
It has drawn sharp reactions from France and China and has brought Australia's domestic and international politics into limelight. The pact, which will also cover AI and other technologies, is one of the country's biggest defense partnerships in decades, and that's what analysts say. To share with us his analysis on this landmark defense partnership, we have with us John West. John West is the author of the book Asian Century on a Knife Edge. John is an adjunct professor at Tokyo's Sophia University, where he teaches Asian economic development and Japanese business and economy.
Hello and welcome everyone. We are with us today John West. John, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much, Kavita.
The US, UK and Australia are setting up a trilateral security partnership. This includes helping Australia to build nuclear-powered submarines. This will be the first time for Australia to acquire nuclear-powered submarines. The initiative, called AUKUS, was announced jointly by the US President Joe Biden and Prime Ministers Boris Johnson and Scott Morrison, joined virtually by video conference. As there are already many partnerships which include these three countries. So John, why does Australia need this new partnership?
Thank you, Kavita, for the interesting question. It is true what you say that Australia has many partnerships involving these countries. For example, with the United States, we have a military strategic alliance called ANZUS. We're in the Quad, along with US, India, Japan. We have a free trade agreement also with the US. So we're in many different things with the US. But the key thing, I think, is that each of these different arrangements has a specific purpose. And the specific purpose of the AUKUS is to share technology with Australia so Australia can make nuclear-powered submarines and share other technology and knowledge with Australia and with the UK. And so it's a very specific thing, which I think is different from the other arrangements. And so I think it makes sense. And a key thing, of course, is that the US's nuclear technology has only ever been shared with one other country before, being the UK. And so these two countries have decided to give Australia special treatment in allowing them access to this nuclear-powered submarine technology. So that's the reason for having a special thing for this.
Yeah, but then who is it aimed against? And like, who is the elephant in the room?
Well, it's quite clear it's aimed at China. You know, China has grown very strongly as an economic powerhouse over the last few decades. And over the last 10 years or so, since Xi Jinping has been president, China has become stronger politically and more assertive politically. And so this is creating waves in the Indo-Pacific. And so it's quite clear that AUKUS is a response to the rise and assertive behavior of China.
Yeah, that explains the chain of events that has led to this security partnership. So what has been China's reaction to this step from Australia?
The chain of events leading to the security partnership, I'd like to say a couple of extra things. China, of course, become more assertive internationally, but also China has been interfering in Australian society and Australian politics. China got upset when Australia decided not to use Huawei for its 5G technology. And China got very upset when Australia called for a independent international inquiry into the origin of COVID-19. And so there's been a rise in assertiveness of China generally, but there's been a deterioration, sharp deterioration in Australia's relationship with China. At the same time, in recent years, particularly since Mr. Trump, when he was president, there's been worries in Australia and other countries about how reliable the US is as a partner. And so Australia is very keen to take any opportunity to encourage the US to be active and serious about the Indo-Pacific. And so from Australia's point of view, a very important part of AUKUS is that it anchors the US more firmly in the Indo-Pacific. Under this agreement, the US will be present and active in the Indo-Pacific for decades to come. And from Australia's point of view, this is a very positive thing, because Australia is a big country with a small population, and we're a little bit frightened of countries like China. And so having the US there as a friend for us, it's a very positive thing.
And what has been China's reaction to this recent step from Australia's side?
China's reaction has been predictably negative. They've criticised it, but it's interesting because they haven't criticised it so strongly. It was very modest criticisms, I thought, and maybe it's because these submarines, Australia won't get the submarines for another 15 or 20 years. It's going to take a long time to build them. And so there's no immediate threat to China from this. But another thing which I think is interesting is that on the same day that the AUKUS agreement was announced, China applied to become a member of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Deal, which is now called the CPTPP. And so, maybe China was trying to be a little bit low-key in its reaction to AUKUS at the same time as it's applying to become a member of the CPTPP.
Can you also please let us know what is Australian domestic politics on the China question? This is important because Prime Minister Scott Morrison has hit back over comments made by former Prime Minister Paul Keating that criticized the landmark submarine deal. Paul Keating has said that Morrison is making an enemy of China.
No, but it's a very interesting question that you raised, Kavita. In Australian society, I would say the majority of people are critical of China and its behaviour, but not everyone. And in the political establishment, most people would be critical of China, but again, not everyone. And so we see that the business community has a different interest. So many business people are very keen to maintain good relations with China. And then there are people like Paul Keating and other people in the political class who thinks that our government has mismanaged the relationship with China. That if we manage the relationship better, we could have a good relationship with China, and a good relationship with China is good for trade with China. And so there is a division in Australia. Most people are critical of China, but there is a group which is critical of Australia's management of the relationship. And I think there's an element of truth in both. I think Australian government has made mistakes. It has mismanaged the relationship to some extent.
So this security partnership has angered an important partner of Australia, that is France. In fact, French President Emmanuel Macron has called French ambassadors to US and Australia. He has recalled them. This is a big step. Kevin Rudd, former Prime Minister from the opposition Labour Party, has called it PM's botched diplomacy, and that Paris has a long memory and Scott Morrison's cavalier treatment of France will hurt Australia. So in this light, why is France furious, and what this holds for Australia's future relationships with the country?
Thank you, Kevin. Another very good question. The first thing I should say is that Scott Morrison comes from our right-wing political party, and Paul Keating, who we spoke about before, and Kevin Rudd come from the left-wing party. And so what happens in Australian politics, like politics everywhere, in the left-wing party will always criticise anything that the right-wing party does, and vice versa. And so these criticisms usually have some merit, but at the same time, the criticisms are very political. But it's true what you say in the introduction to the question. France is furious with Australia. France is hopping mad with Australia. They think that Australia has been betrayed France. It's breached the trust with France. And Australia was negotiating this in secret with the US and the UK without keeping the French informed at all. And so the French are very upset about that. The betrayal, as I said. Secondly, the submarine deal with France was a very big contract. Lots of money, lots of business involved, lots of jobs. And so they're going to lose that. But thirdly, France is a country that sees itself as an Indo-Pacific power. France has a number of islands in the Pacific. It even has an island in the Indian Ocean, Reunion. In the Indo-Pacific, in the Pacific Ocean, they have Tahiti and New Caledonia and so on. So the France sees themselves as a political power in the Pacific, and they would like to be as strong as a political power. And for them, AUKUS is a setback to their political ambitions in the Indo-Pacific.
Do you think this will undermine Western solidarity on the challenge of China's rise?
I don't think so, but we still have to wait and see. You know, AUKUS is a very new thing. It's still more of a concept rather than a detailed strategy or policy. And so we still have to see what will happen. But I think that most Western countries are fairly critical of China's behaviour. And I think for the moment, it won't adversely affect Western solidarity. But we have to wait and see.
My next question is also related to France, that as the AUKUS deal has visibly led to deterioration of diplomatic relation, at least for now, between France and Australia. So what impact can we expect it to have on trade relations between Australia and France? And also EU officials have demanded an apology from Australia or France treatment before negotiations on Australia-European Union free trade deal, which is being delayed as a fallout of AUKUS. So will this also impact Australia-EU trade relations as well? So like, I want to know like the relations with the French and relations with European Union.
But Kavita, again, it's a very important question that you ask. The European Union, I think, is Australia's third largest trading partner, if you take the European Union as a bloc. And so it's very important for Australia, for our economy. And as you said, we're currently negotiating a free trade agreement with the European Union. And so some people are worried that this AUKUS may undermine Australia's bargaining power, Australia's capacity to get a good deal in the free trade agreement, and may delay the free trade agreement. Again, I don't know. I'm not sure that every European country would want to sacrifice the free trade agreement on account of France. And there's another risk also. The European Union is threatening to levy carbon tariffs on countries that make enough effort on climate change. And in the eyes of many people, Australia is not doing enough on climate change. Australia is a coal country. We have lots of coal, we have coal-fired electricity, and we export lots of coal. And so one risk is that our capacity to avoid a carbon tariff on our trade with Europe may be compromised. So you're right, trade is an important issue with the free trade agreement and the risk of carbon tariffs being there for Australia.
Going to my last question, Boris Johnson, Joe Biden and Scott Morrison, in their announcement of the AUKUS, repeatedly announced that the submarines delivered under the security partnership will be conventionally armed nuclear power submarines, that it will not be nuclear armed. What it is that is so important about this particular detail of being conventionally armed and not nuclear armed, that it finds multiple repetitions from these leaders. Can you elaborate this with respect to the Australian domestic politics and its international treaty commitments?
These submarines that Australia is going to build will be nuclear powered, but not nuclear armed. And Australia has a very strong anti-nuclear movement. And so this is the reason behind the insistence on the submarines not being nuclear armed. I should say that Australia has one of the world's biggest resources of uranium, and we export lots of uranium, but we don't have nuclear power in Australia. Again, this is the anti-nuclear movement in Australia. And so that is one of the reasons why the leaders have insisted on repeating about the fact that these nuclear propelled submarines won't have nuclear arms. And the other factor, of course, is Australia's engagement under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Australia is very keen not to violate that treaty.
With that, we'll wrap up the interview. Thanks a lot, John, for giving your wonderful insights on the AUKUS strategic partnership. I really hope all our viewers will be benefited from your insights.